horizon of hope toward a more just, equitable, and sustainable world where the work that we're doing together is the work of shalom justice.
White privilege, colorblindness, white supremacy.
About colorblindness, I think in intercultural worlds we talk about that as minimization. When you think, oh, we're all the same, we're all people, we all have the same needs. When we talk about that, there's no color, we're all the same. What we're really saying at the core of that is we're all like me. Think about that for a minute. We're the same means we're all like me, because we're the center, we're the normal, right? When we say those statements, that's what colorblindness is. It's saying, well, Karen, to me you're just like a white person. I don't see your color. Meaning that part of you that is such a big part of who you are, I choose not to see that. That's hugely insulting, right? Just like being a man or a woman, we want equal rights between men and women, we want equal rights. However, men and women are different, and there are strengths in each gender that have to be recognized and celebrated. And it's the same with race or with culture. So to say gender blindness, well, that means my gifts as a woman aren't acknowledged. Suddenly we're all male, because that's the default, right? So if I say colorblindness, it's the same thing. Suddenly we're all white, in the most bland sense of the world possible. And so that's colorblindness for you.
Yeah, and just to add, it just feels disrespectful, like you don't see me. You're saying, I choose not to see you. And it feels insulting, because it's not true, right? There's a piece of that that's just not true. Unless you truly are colorblind and can only see shades of gray, but.
I think the idea of privilege and supremacy are difficult to understand, particularly because supremacy, raises all kinds of objections. But as our brother said, there were systems and structures put into place that remember it said all men are created equal. And in that there's a certain kind of man that's a wealthy landowner that excluded women and excluded people of color. That there were systems that were put in place that give advantage to some people over others. So I like to think of privilege as being an unearned advantage, an unearned privilege that you have. Not something that you work towards, but that structures and systems are set up to benefit you in some way and not benefit others. It's kind of like my father-in-law is left-handed, and I've discovered he and I both like to do projects around the house, but there are a lot of disadvantages he has being left-handed that I don't have being right-handed. Power tools are set up for me where the safety switch is. Scissors are set up for me. All kinds of desks are set up for me. Things that are set up that give me an advantage as a white person in some way that he is a left-handed person. So that's sort of a simplistic way to think about it, but it's true. And those structures are in place to benefit me over and against him. The idea of white supremacy, I think, is important. Like some liberal in a college or university didn't think up this term. People of color didn't think up this term. White folks thought up this term. It was a way they described themselves to put them over and above other people. So there was a whole movement coming out of the Enlightenment that looked at everything on an evolutionary scale. So we have biological evolution, right? We start from the most simplistic sources of life to the most complex. And what's at the top in the creation world? Us. It looks at world religions from the most primitive, quote unquote, polytheistic to the most evolved, which is what? Probably Christianity that looks like us. Put everything on political systems on an evolutionary scale, cultural systems on an evolutionary scale, and race on an evolutionary scale. And of course, what's at the top? The political system, the cultural system, the evolutionary system, the color system of people that look like me. And that's the idea that, in the insidious, simple thing of white supremacy, is to say we, because of who we are and the color of our skin, are more wholly created in the image of God than someone who has darker skin. And that was where the idea of white supremacy, so we could have power over others, we have to find a way to make ourselves superior to others.
There's actually a lot of science coming up out of those evolutionary movements, and one of Paul Baraka is an anthropologist who thought he would measure people's brains, So he had skulls from white people and skulls from black people, and he measured the volume. His theory was the bigger the brain, the smarter you are. And so he used mustard seeds and packed them into the brains and measured the volume of the brains that way. And it turned out that he packed the seeds tighter into the white people's brains, or skulls. So his measures always looked like white people had bigger skulls, which is like the size of your skull does not determine your smartness, first off, but even if it did, the white skulls and the black skull, there was no actual significant size difference. He made up that unconsciously because he so wanted to believe that the whites had bigger brains and were smarter, and that was his whole theory. You have a lot of evolutionary charts in the time period, starting with monkeys and evolving into white people, and who's in the middle is the black person. And still to this day, in Europe at least, there's a lot of racial slurs that involve monkeys to talk about black people. And on soccer games, when the black players get on the field, the black player comes to the field and people make monkey noises. That's still happening in France today, in soccer games. That's not okay. But that's the whole idea then, that you put the white person at the end of the chain and you find some scientific evidence to justify what you believe and twist it to what you believe.
And how do you create that idea? You have to how do you enslave people that are of a different race, in what took place in the early part of this country? You have, especially if you're a Christian, how do you do that? You have to dehumanize the other and come up with some theory to make them less than what God created them in some way. Somewhat less than human, so that you have a justification for enslaving them. And that idea was what was called white supremacy. It was the excuse we came up with, trying to do it scientifically, to say these people are less than human, they're less than created in the image of God, and that became a justification for oppression.
Give it a little pregnant pause here for a minute. Okay. I'll take a little bit of a breathing break here. I want you guys to huddle around your tables and spend just a minute or two talking to the people next to you. What have you heard that you think is important? Or what kind of questions are percolating for you? So just go ahead and turn to the people next to you and just kind of do a short little debrief. Let's all know if you got a minute or two. Okay, when it pulls back together here, I'm not technically for sure if that was a minute or not, or 2 minutes. Another one of the questions here that we're getting, and some of the questions that Zach wanted us to talk about, were issues of how do those of us who are white, how do we work through issues of guilt and shame? And how do those feelings and those emotions, how can they be positive and how can they be negative in stopping our journey? Here's one. I'll answer that question and I'll come back to this one. So how do those issues around guilt and shame, how can they be used positively or negatively in this process for white people?
I think you do have guilt when you realize what's happening, and I remember, in college having friends from different nations and different races, and then later here at Bethel and through graduate school, learning about white privilege, learning about race, and learning about these issues in classes or forums like what you hear today, and realizing I told one of my friends that to me she wasn't black. I told that to a friend of mine. I said, well, to me you're not black. To me you're just like a regular person. And then when I learned about this, and I realized, wow, this was terribly offensive. And now I don't see her all the time, you know, and then I ran into her and I made an effort to apologize to her, and I just felt so bad. And I realized there is that guilt, but Jesus made a way for our guilt, right? There's redemption for that guilt. And I think owning that guilt and owning that sin and realizing it is sin, and it is ugly and hideous and it hurts God, when you own that, then you can get past that and ask for forgiveness, and you can confess your sin, you can ask for forgiveness, you can repent. And then I was able to see her later and apologize and explain to her. And she said, oh, I know you said that. You know, thank you for apologizing. People do that kind of stuff all the time. But she was grateful. And I think for her, I had admiration for her to realize that she forgave me on the spot when I said that comment. She still remained my friend for years. And I really appreciate her graciousness to do that. And I think now as a mom too, I think of what movies my kids watch and the messages in those movies. For example, the Babauer books, this little elephant guy who becomes a king, is so imperialist. It is so offensive. I see these books and I want to hurl. I mean, seriously. And so, do I not have my kids read Babauer, or do I have them read it and do a debrief with them? It's kind of where I'm at right now. What do I do with this? Same for Disney movies with messages about sexism and all those kinds of things. I'm like, okay, do I let my kids watch those movies, and if they watch them, how do I explain to them the bad things in the movies and the good things? I can't just sit there and be neutral, because there's no neutral. So I can, you know, ignore my guilt and be in denial, or I can seek redemption and actually try to do something and repent and move forward from that guilt. And I think the guilt